Good afternoon. Welcome to the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. And join us in our discussion today on a very important topic, which is the Guyana-Venezuela border disputes and its significance for our region, both the Caribbean and Latin America. I am Dr. Essequibo, and I'd like to introduce you first to our director, who will give welcome remarks. Dr. Henry.
Thank you very much, Ashaki. I want to first start by welcoming our distinguished panelists, Dr. Raymond Kirton, one of our honorary senior fellows at the college, and the very distinguished Mr. Greenidge. This is an issue that is of critical importance for us. We believe that there is one Caribbean, and we believe that the countries of the Caribbean have an indivisible connection with the country and people of Guyana. And the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies is extremely honored to be able to facilitate this discussion almost in real time. I want to thank my colleague, Dr. Malin Anatol, the Dean for Research and the Director of the Emma Francois Institute, for putting this together. I welcome you all here, and we look forward to a very insightful discussion. Just before we came down, I asked Carl and Mark to give me the 101 of this rapidly moving phenomenon that we are faced with. And the layers of complexity are quite intriguing. Trinidadian, so there must be at least one little bit of pecan. I am not quite sure which side of the divide my very distinguished colleague, Dr. Essequibo, falls in. Dr. Do has very close contacts with Venezuela, but I think the fact that when she was a child growing up in Venezuela, that they would make fun of her because she spoke English may be something in our favor. Ashaki.
First, I would like to present our first panelist, Dr. Raymond Kirton. He's the Managing Director of RMK Consulting Enterprise and Director of the Center for International Border Studies, which are registered research and project monitoring and evaluating services based in Georgetown, Guyana. For more than 4 decades, in various capacities, Mr. Kirton has provided high-level service to clients regionally and across the hemisphere. His services include research on political pooling, political risk assessment, elections observations, indigenous populations, disaster management research, social science research, data collection and analysis, survey design, and project evaluation. He is a past director of the Institute of International Relations at the University of the West Indies and has contributed to education in his region by leading off-island master's programs in Suriname and Guyana. He has published numerous articles in journals and chapters in books. Please help me to welcome Dr. Kirton.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for that very kind introduction, Shaki. I would like to, first of all, to extend greetings to the members of the Diplomatic Corps, our colleagues both in person and online, and to especially ensure that I express my most sincere appreciation to the director and staff of the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies for organizing and hosting this important event, which is a follow-up actually to a similar event which we participated in 2023. and at which we discussed several dimensions of the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy and the existential threat to Guyana's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Today, we witness an escalation in aggression and new and unprecedented action by Venezuela. And it is therefore important for us from Guyana and the region to be constantly engaged in sensitizing our Caribbean brothers and sisters on these important issues which have implications for the Caribbean as a region. We meet once again on this beautiful island, and it is significant that we are discussing this critical regional issue, not only in the country where the Treaty of Chaguaramas was signed, the treaty being a collective commitment which ushered in integration and an integration arrangement, CARICOM. We meet today also in a country which hosts the Secretariat of the Association of Caribbean States, a mechanism which was born out of the findings of the West Indian Commission in its 1990s report, Time for Action, which highlighted the need for a widening and deepening of the integration of the wider Caribbean in an environment of peaceful cooperation. We're meeting today in the state that is lead on security issues in the CARICOM quasi-cabinet, Trinidad, and a country which itself has seen an influx of migrants from Venezuela, as has been the case in Guyana and other CARICOM states. We meet at a critical juncture in a rapidly changing global and regional political environment, filled with complexities which demand unity and cohesiveness. As the program has indicated, there will be a range of perspectives shared, and have been, in a sense, mandated to place in historical context the current issues, one of which involved the recent incursion of a Venezuelan naval vessel into Guyana's maritime space in an area currently active in oil and gas production. It is also noteworthy that in recent weeks, there have been attacks by armed Venezuelans on Guyana military servicemen in Guyanese territorial waters. And these unprovoked events are taking place when the issues related to the Venezuelan claim to 2/3 of Guyana's territory is being adjudicated at the International Court of Justice. I think it is important to provide a historical overview of the controversy, which begins with a situation in which, after a series of disagreements between Great Britain and Venezuela in the 1800s, in relation to the boundaries between the then colony British Guyana and Venezuela, came the establishment of the Anglo-Venezuelan Arbitral Tribunal under the Treaty of Washington of 1897. Under the terms of this treaty, Britain and Venezuela agreed, quote, to consider the results of the Tribunal of Arbitration as a full, perfect, and final settlement of all questions referred to the arbitrators, end of quote. In October 1899, in a unanimous decision, the tribunal described the boundary which was established as, quote, a line based on equity and law, end of quote. It was clearly noted at that time that both Britain and Venezuela were in full agreement, and the boundary which was determined by the tribunal was surveyed, and the markers defining the boundary were put in place by a mixed British-Venezuela Boundary Commission, and was thereafter reflected in the 1905 boundary agreement between Britain and Venezuela. I think it is also significant to note that in 1931, Venezuela, Brazil, and British Guyana met and marked the point where the British Guyana-Venezuela boundary line, established in 1899, met the boundary with Brazil. This area was then named the Tri-Junction Point, and this action also indicated quite clearly that the countries, that there was agreement by all parties. A physical marker was placed, and the pillar had the full agreement of all parties. And as noted by the then Venezuelan Foreign Minister, and I quote, "The Tri-Junction Point, recently determined and marked with a pillar by the commissions of the three countries, gave clear proof of the spirit of justice, good faith, and cordiality which animates its actions in the conduct of international relations." That was in 1931. It's also important to note here that Brazil, which settled its borders with then British Guyana since 1904, and was part of the group which established the Tri-Junction Point, has maintained its position until today, that borders which have been settled through the judicial process are inviolable, and as its analysts have noted, the historical process, I quote, of Brazil's international action, which included the settlement of its borders, have been based on pacifism, knowledge diplomacy, and confidence in international law. And this has undoubtedly led to its consistent position on the settlement, on the sanctity of settled borders. It is also noteworthy that based on the defined and accepted boundary awarded by the tribunal in 1899, both Venezuela and Guyana exercised full rights of jurisdiction in their respective territories until 1962, when, with Guyana approaching its independence in this period of decolonization, Venezuela unilaterally declared the arbitral award to be null and void and moved its claim of the territory west of the Essequibo River to the United Nations. I think it's also instructive to note that Venezuela raised the territorial claim not only when Guyana was pursuing its path to independence in its bid to free itself from the shackles of colonial rule, and indeed, when Venezuela first presented its spurious contention, one of its major arguments as the basis of invalidity of the arbitration award of 1899 was a memorandum written by a lawyer, Severo Male Provo, who appeared as part of the Venezuelan legal team during the sittings of the tribunal in 1899. It was claimed in a memorandum in 1945, which this gentleman instructed to be published posthumously, that the award was the result of collusion, allegedly among some of the judges of the tribunal. As far as could be ascertained, no evidence has ever been presented by Venezuela in support of this claim. Now, going back to November 1962, a group of experts was established, and the group indicated that there was no evidence to support the contention of nullity. But even in the face of this clear lack of evidence, Venezuela remained unconvinced. And as a result, Britain, British Guyana, and Venezuela signed the Geneva Agreement in 1966, which stipulated a process which the parties will follow for a period of 4 years to resolve this controversy. A mixed commission was established, but this effort to resolve the controversy was unsuccessful. And I argue here that the work of this group was constrained during this period, since acts of aggression by Venezuela were carried out, including the occupation of Guyana's half of the Ankoko Island in 1966. Additionally, with the signing of a decree by President Leone to annex part of Guyana's maritime zone and public statements by Venezuela objecting to any developmental activity in the Essequibo region. One could argue here that these actions undermine confidence in the process, and as a result of the lack of success of the Mixed Commission, another attempt at resolving the controversy came in 1970, when Trinidad and Tobago, led by then Prime Minister Dr. Eric Williams, brokered the signing of the Protocol of Port of Spain. Such was the level of aggression at the time which faced the small, newly independent state with little diplomatic experience or military capability. And we saw where, under the terms of the Protocol of the Port of Spain, it was to remain in effect for 12 years, renewable for successive periods, each by agreement of the governments. It was envisaged that for this period, efforts would be made to promote friendly relations between the two states, and it was seen as a mechanism to provide an opportunity for de-escalating the tensions between the two countries and allowing for the freezing of the claim and for the parties to seek new levels of rapprochement during this period. By the time of its expiration in 1982, Venezuela had indicated its unwillingness to renew it, and this period coincided with renewed tensions, during which time Venezuela used its influence internationally to block World Bank financing for Guyana's hydropower development program, and also influenced the exclusion of Guyana from concessionary oil agreements which had been offered to CARICOM and Central American states at that time. The expiration of that protocol in 1982 meant that another effort at settling the controversy had to be sought, and both parties decided to refer the issue to the Secretary General of the United Nations. It must be noted here that within the framework of the 1966 Geneva Agreement, the United Nations Secretary General was empowered to utilize what is termed his good office. I think that generally means his prestige and the weight of the world community he represents, in an effort to prevent the international controversy from escalating or spreading. The Secretary General conducted the good offices process from 1990 to 2017, aimed at securing a solution to the border controversy. In the absence of a resolution, and after much dialogue, the government of Guyana approached the Secretary General to act in accordance with his obligation under the 1966 Geneva Agreement, and for him to choose another of the means of settlement to the controversy, which is stipulated in Article 33 of the United Nations Charter. Guyana articulated its preference for judicial settlement at that time, calling for a final and binding decision in relation to the Venezuela contention that the 1899 arbitrary award was null and void. The then Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, presented to the parties in December 2016 a framework for the resolution of the controversy and indicated that the good offices process would continue for a final year until the end of 2017 with an expanded and strengthened mandate of mediation. Both parties were notified that in the absence of significant process made towards reaching a full settlement for the solution of the controversy, the Secretary General would choose the International Court of Justice as the mechanism for a settlement. In January 2018, Secretary General Gutierrez, after comprehensive assessment of the issue, chose the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, and based on the decision of the Secretary General, Guyana filed an application to institute legal proceedings in 2018. It is also instructive to observe that in the same year, in June 2018, the ICJ received communication from the government of Venezuela that it would not participate in the matter, even though the Geneva Agreement provided the Secretary General with authority to choose that court as the means of conclusive settlement to the matter. The issue of the court's jurisdiction, raised on 2 occasions by Venezuela, saw a ruling by the court that it had legal authority to adjudicate in the matter. And we see where Venezuela participates, I would say, at some times. They've presented memorial and come to memorial, etc. But the issue in relation to the validity of the 1899 award is currently engaging the attention of the court. It is noteworthy that in spite of these treaty obligations, judicial interventions and dialogue, Venezuela, since 1966, through its acts of aggression, has significantly impacted the economic development of Guyana. And as we mentioned, one could recall that in 1966, an incursion by armed Venezuelan soldiers and civilians took place on the Guyana side of the Ankoko Island, which was, Guyana's territory after, as a result of the 1899 award. And we see where acts of aggression have included, but were not limited to, the incursion into Guyana's territorial space, the seizure of Guyanese fishing vessels, the arrest of a vessel conducting seismic surveys in Guyana's exclusive economic zone by Venezuela, and as well as threats against companies engaged in economic partnership arrangements with the government of Guyana. One may also recall that in May 2015, the government of Venezuela issued a decree, 1787, which declared Venezuelan sovereignty over Guyana's maritime space adjacent to the Venezuelan coast, the Essequibo coast. And this decree threatened the sovereignty of several neighboring CARICOM states, including Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, and Barbados. And while under some pressure it was withdrawn, another decree succeeded it, which merely removed some coordinates related to the maritime zone. You can say here that the range of aggressive action by Venezuela for more than 50 years in pursuit of this claim has not slowed down. As a matter of fact, we witnessed now the Maduro government's action, unprecedented once more, in which a referendum was held in 2023, in spite of declarations from the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, which indicated clearly that Essequibo and both parties should refrain from any action in relation to Essequibo until the issue had been finally adjudicated. We see where some have seen these as moves to reignite unity in Venezuela and patriotism, and in a sense to ensure that some level of legitimacy was regained by the Maduro administration internationally, and to perhaps build on its demonstration of national unity. One cannot discount that at the time the emergence of the new oil and gas sector and its potential link to the increase in Venezuelan activity in relation to its claim. As we move forward to the recent past, in the last few weeks, there have been significant actions by Venezuela which demand our attention and analysis. Of some significance, one might suggest, is the announcement by the Trump administration to cancel authorization to Chevron Corporation of the US to operate its oil fields in Venezuela, an operation which provided an economic and financial lifeline for the Maduro administration in the midst of an economic and humanitarian crisis in that country. One could say here that part of the move to escalate these actions by Venezuela may be a test of the geopolitical temperature in the region at this time. In late February, armed Venezuelans attacked Guyana Defense Force personnel in the Cipriani River, causing serious injury to a number of Guyanese soldiers. On March 1st, a Venezuelan naval vessel moved into Guyana's exclusive economic zone, an active area of oil and gas production, and approached a floating production, storage, and offloading vessel, an FPSO, operated by a consortium comprising ExxonMobil, Guyana, the Hess Corporation, and China National Offshore Oil Corporation, CNOOC, in clear violation of the maritime boundary, which has been recognized by international law. This escalation in unprovoked action by Venezuela has gained international attention, and we see where the US has warned of severe consequences, quote unquote, if there's any future Venezuelan action of this type. It is not without significance also that Venezuela has scheduled an election for the governor of the state of what they term Guyana Essequibo in May, on the eve of Guyana's observance of its 59th anniversary of its independence, an action clearly intended to increase the intimidation of the Guyanese people and government. Now, I see these are very important. Here we have, first of all, the move by, for the first time, across Guyana's waters into territory which is part of Guyana's exclusive economic zone, and the naval vessel indicating to the FPSO, the vessel, the oil production and storage vessel, that they're operating in Venezuelan waters. Now, my colleague, Mr. Greenidge, will surely elaborate on some of the legal and other issues related to that action. We also see where Venezuela has signed into law that Essequibo is now a state of Venezuela called Guyana Essequibo, and is actively now going to have an election of a governor to a territory that is legally has never been part of Venezuela and has always been part of Guyana. Now, in my view, with diplomacy continuing to be Guyana's first line of defense, I can argue that the current unprecedented level of aggression and the statements related to possible armed intervention and annexation, Guyana has to, at the same time as it increases its diplomatic effort across the hemisphere, it must simultaneously seek to upgrade its military asset base for maritime, aerial, and ground defense. It must also continuously update the United Nations Security Council on the escalating threat levels, because I think there's Article 34 of the United Nations Charter, which suggests that the Security Council may investigate any dispute or any situation which may lead to international tension, friction, or give rise to further dispute in order to determine whether the continuance of the dispute or situation is likely to endanger the maintenance of international peace. We see, given the clear and present danger to the Guyanese citizenry, there should be establishment, and I once again would want to call for the establishment of a special unit in Guyana comprising of professionals, academics, and other personnel on a full-time basis to be engaged in strategic analysis and policy recommendations, especially in the context of this rapidly changing and increasingly complex regional and global geopolitical environment. Additionally, with the security of member states being member states of CARICOM being part of the fourth pillar of regional integration, as enshrined in the revised Treaty of Chagaramas, CARICOM should actively consider the enlargement and widening of the regional security system, of which Guyana is a member, to establish a Caribbean regional security system and launch a military observation mission in Guyana. At the same time, I believe, CARICOM should consider joining Guyana in a joint approach with the United Nations to seek the establishment, with the CRSS engaged, of a multilateral military mission in support of local forces as a multinational force, excuse me, which can act as a deterrent to possible incursion on Guyanese territory and prevent loss of life, especially in the border communities. It is not without significance that Guyana's neighbor, Brazil, has gained much experience in the region as a result of its participation in the military humanitarian mission Haiti, MINUSTA, under the aegis of the United Nations, and with its diplomatic tradition of respect for borders and international rules. I believe there could be urgent and sustained interaction with that country to add its weight to the strategic engagement. Let me reiterate that these actions by Venezuela must receive full and total condemnation from brother and sister CARICOM states, who must be in the forefront of the effort to clearly advocate for sustained international action in the face of this existential threat to Guyana's sovereignty. There has to be, in a sense, full agreement to support Guyana in this issue by Caribbean states. Guyana must also now engage regional groupings, such as the Caribbean Media Workers Group, CAMWORK, the regional universities and other groups and institutions, churches, mosques, temples, and civil society, in sensitizing the regional populace on this issue and promote greater understanding of the threat faced by its sister state. Additionally, the Association of Caribbean States and the OAS must also be engaged in the regional effort, especially in the context of the view that the region must continue to be a zone of peace. Further, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, which Guyana participates, and in which CARICOM as a group participates through the sitting chair as one of the quartet of countries coordinating the 33-member grouping, must also be integrally involved in the promotion of adherence to the rule of international law and peaceful resolution of controversies through internationally established judicial institutions. Perhaps the most important approach to be enhanced by Guyana is the sustained sensitization of the citizenry in order to avoid misinterpretation, misinformation, information deficits, and the emergence of speculation. This will ensure that the nation speaks in one voice, with one voice. I therefore use this opportunity to call on my CARICOM brothers and sisters and our brothers and sisters in the hemisphere to actively advocate for unequivocal support to be extended to Guyana in this critical period. There is a recognition of individual states' national interests, but the threat to the territorial integrity and national sovereignty of a sister state demands full and unequivocal support. I therefore wish to be associated with the position of Guyana, supported by both government and opposition, that it considers that the only appropriate forum for Venezuela to raise its territorial claim, consistent with the rule of international law and the preservation of peace and security, is the International Court of Justice in The Hague, which has already twice determined that it has the jurisdiction to resolve the claims made by Venezuela. Further, as Guyana notes, a resolution by the court assures both parties of a final, binding, and permanent settlement. that is equitable, just, and consistent with the international law. I remember the last time we discussed the Guyana issue here at the same venue in which the college graciously hosted us. I presented a call for Guyanese and our friends everywhere in the hemisphere and beyond to not only sing along with us, not a blade of grass, but commit to join us as active participants as we not only sing, but act, since as the popular Guyanese song goes, we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no sea, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to me, to we, sorry. I look forward to continuing collaboration with the Cipriani College as the region and as we together confront a significant threat to Guyana, a sister state. And I would say again, in concluding, we cannot give up a mountain, we cannot give up a sea, we cannot give up any river that is ours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kirton, for your reflections on this issue. Please allow me to acknowledge the presence of Her Excellency Maria Elisa Teofilo de Luna, Ambassador, Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, Embassy of the Federative Republic of Brazil. Our second presenter, Professor Paulo Gustavo Correa, is a professor of International Relations and Border Studies at the Federal University of Amapá in Macapá, Brazil. He has written widely on security and issues related to the Guyana Shield. Welcome, Professor Correa.
Hi, everyone. You're listening well. Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be part of this panel. And thank you for the invitation.
Can you please unmute your mic, Professor? Your mic is muted.
Sorry?
Yes, your mic was muted. Okay, great.
It's on? It's on?
Yes, it is. Yes, we can hear you now.
Well, thank you very much. My words will be focused on the impact of the escalating crisis between Venezuela and Guyana, but focus on the Brazil's role. And to do so, I will first have a short abstract on the relationship between Venezuela and Brazil over the past 20 years. Venezuela and Brazil relations. It's a convergence and divergence over these 20 years. The relationship between Brazil and Venezuela has gone through different phases over these two past decades, reflecting political change in both countries and the regional challenges. The first phase that I would like to stress, it's during what we call Lula 1 and Lula 2, Lula's government between 2003 to 2010, when we had as president of Venezuelan president Hugo Chavez. That relationship was a strategic approach based on political affinity between both countries and to pursue a more integrated South America. This period was marked by trade agreements, investments, regional instructions, and the strengthening of Mercosur, culminating even in the Venezuela's accession in the bloc in 2012. The second phase It's during that I'd like to stress, it's during the government of Jair Bolsonaro and Nicolas Maduro. That was marked by a rupture. Bolsonaro took an openly adversarial stance toward the Venezuela's government, recognizing even Juan Guaido as an interim president at the time and closing the Brazilian embassy in Caracas. Diplomatic relations practically ceased during Bolsonaro's period, and the Venezuela migration crisis became a sensitive issue in the Brazilian politics, something that I will talk a little bit later. It's interesting because in the political campaign between Bolsonaro and Lula, the one that Lula won, what we call Lula 3, there was just saying that Brazil wouldn't become a Venezuela. So Venezuela became, for the Bolsonarism, a place where we shouldn't be, or a relation that we shouldn't have. The third phase, and the important one for our discussion, it's what we call Lula 3. The return of Lula's return to the presidency in 2023. There was an initial attempt to rapprochement between Brazil and Venezuela. Brazil resumed the dialogue with Maduro and reintegrated Venezuela into the regional forums. However, two recent events have once again distanced these two countries. First event connected to straight to Guyana is the Maduro's referendum on Essequibo, and the second event is the Venezuelan presidential election. Those are factors of distancing. Maduro's referendum and election is a factors of distancing Lula 3 with Venezuela. The Venezuelan referendum in December 2023 on the annexation of the Essequibo territory controlled by Guyana generated strong international concern. Brazil opposed any military escalation, emphasizing the need for a peaceful solution. Additionally, Maduro's 2024 election was questioned by international organizations, and the Brazilian government response was cautious, with Lula marking critical statements about the Venezuelan government authoritarian tendency. Authoritarian tendency became the Lula speech on Maduro's election. This stance led to a withdrawal of the Venezuelan ambassador from Brazil, and the diplomatic distance between these two countries. Another sign of the deterioration was Brazil's veto on Venezuela's entry into the BRICS group. While Maduro sought to expand his presence in international forum, Brazil, which historically played a mediating role, opted to block the participation, reinforcement, the retreat in the bilateral relations. Brazil, what we can think about of Brazilian concerns about the impact of Essequibo crisis. Brazil has strategic reasons to be concerned about the escalation of a crisis between Venezuela and Guyana. The Essequibo dispute not only threatens the region's stability, but could also compromise Lula's vision of a rebuilding South America as an integrated and strategic geopolitical region. A conflict could deepen divisions and hinder regional cooperation efforts. Moreover, there is a risk of uncontrolled migration flow, even bigger than we have now. I think everyone here in this room, all the countries here know that Venezuela economic and political crisis has already led millions to seek refuge in neighboring countries, including Brazil. A worsening of this situation could increase pressure on the state of Roraima, the state, the one that is bordering Guyana and Venezuela. Uh, and the state is already struggling to accommodate the incoming of Venezuelan migrants. And that's a crisis that can get all South America. The Venezuelan migration crisis has generated one of the largest displacement flows in Latin America in the recent years. Brazil, between 2015 and 2024, approximately in between these years, approximately 500,000 Venezuelans entered Brazil. In 2004, Brazil registered the arrival of almost 200,000 migrants, half of it were Venezuelans. In South America, in Colombia, over 1 million Venezuelans refugees. In Peru, over 500,000. In Chile, almost 300,000. In Ecuador, over 200,000. And even in Argentina, received approximately 130,000. These numbers reflect the magnitude of the Venezuela migration crisis in the challenges and challenge South American countries in welcome the integrating this population. About the Brazilian position on the international conflict, if I can, I want to share a screen if it's possible. Just to let me know if it's sharing the screen. Is it sharing? Can you just let me know if it's sharing? Yeah, it is. Okay. Here I tried to think of 3 possible scenarios for escalating the crisis between Venezuela and Brazil about Brazilian position. Sorry, about Venezuela and Guyana, about Brazilian position. The first scenario is the what I would call the less likely but possible. Is Brazil adopt a passive stance and remains neutral. Is less likely but possible if the government avoids direct involvement. In this scenario, Brazil would adopt a minimalist and pragmatic approach, avoiding taking sides and limiting its action to diplomatic rhetoric. This approach could occur if, first, the Lula administration believes that deeper involvement in the crisis would bring more costs than benefits for Brazil. Second, the conflict remains in low intensity with no direct military actions, what would make another scenario. And third, Brazil prioritizes domestic political stability and seeks to avoid diplomatic friction while rebuilding its foreign policy credibility. As is known, Brazil in the last government had a lot of domestic instability, and now it's trying to rebuild. And if it's not really possible, Brazil would avoid this diplomatic friction. In this case, Brazil could maintain a generic diplomatic stance, avoid imposing sanctions or vetoes against Venezuela, and increasing its monitoring of the Roraima border, but refrain from making explicit moves against Caracas. This approach, however, could perceive a sign of weakness of Brazilian foreign policy, undermining Brazil's ability to influence regional stability. The second scenario is Brazil harden its stance against Maduro and strengthen alliance with Guyana and Western partners. Possible scenario if Venezuela takes aggressive actions against Guyana. If Venezuela adopts more aggressive stance, such as military movements in the Essequibo region, Brazil may pressured to take a firmer position against Maduro. That this could happen due to factors such as concern about the regional stability, pressure from United States and European Union, it defends the international order. In this context, Brazil could strengthen ties with Guyana, including a possible joint military exercise along the border to demonstrate its commitment to regional stability. It hasn't happened ever between Brazil and Guyana. Align with national sanctions against Venezuela if the conflict escalates, further limit diplomatic relation with Maduro, reinforce the ongoing distance between the two governments. Let's remember, Maduro took his ambassador out of our country. This stance would mark a shift in Brazil's foreign policy, a definitive break with Maduro. However, Lula might resist this path to avoid aligning too closely with the US interest in the region. And the last scenario, what I would say the most likely scenario, Brazil regional peacemaker, most likely aligned with Brazil's tradition foreign policy and Lula's current administration. In this scenario, Brazil takes an active mediating role, seeking to prevent military escalation and reinforcing its position as a regional leader in South America, based on its diplomatic tradition of non-intervention and peaceful conflict resolution. The Brazilian government could so first, promote the direct dialogue between Venezuela, Guyana, through regional mechanisms such as UNASUR, not very workful nowadays, but CELAC or CARICOM, very important on this case. Work with multilateral organizations such as UN or OAS to ensure that crisis is resolved with the framework of international law. Third, avoid explicit alignment with either side while reinforcing the need to respect sovereignty and international law, applying pressure on Venezuela to prevent unilateral action. Fourth, taking diplomatic steps to minimize the crisis impact on regional integration, which is a priority for the current Lula administration. And the last thing that I would stress, this approach would reinforce Brazil's image of a reliable and stabilizing actor in South America, maintaining its strategy of non-military involvement. Well, thank you very much. Hope I have contributed, and I'm open to any questions or. Yeah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My thanks to the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies for their kind invitation to make this presentation. And please allow me to express my appreciation for the arrangement to have me make a recorded presentation. At the same time, I must apologize to the organizers, my distinguished colleagues on the panel, and to the audience for my inability to present live and be part of the Q&A due to a scheduling conflict. I have, however, full confidence that my colleagues will address your questions fulsomely and that they will be able to lead you in a lively and illuminating discussion. Given the knowledge that my colleagues will deal in depth with the background to this discussion on the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy, the case before the International Court of Justice, and Venezuela's latest provocations, I will try to focus on some of the geopolitical and diplomatic elements of the current crisis. Allow me to begin with a few general thoughts. May you live in interesting times is a phrase generally believed to be an ancient Chinese curse. There's actually no evidence of this, and the expression is perhaps apocryphal. The widest possible and often ironic interpretation of interesting has nonetheless become part of diplomatic understatement. During the pandemic, the phrase unprecedented times became almost a cliche. Now, ever since January the 20th, 2025, we hear people speak of these extraordinary times. Now that I'm a retired diplomat, I can speak a little more freely. Ladies and gentlemen, we are living in dangerous and turbulent times. The international rules-based order and multilateral diplomacy are under siege. Global geopolitics is undergoing a seismic shift, the likes of which we have not witnessed since the lead up to World War II. Transactional negotiations and bullying are undermining traditional notions of diplomacy and alliance building. Might is right. These are dangerous and turbulent times for the world, but more so for countries in asymmetrical relationships. Guyana is and always has been in such a relationship with Venezuela. Over the course of the border controversy, with no military power to compete with our larger neighbor to the west, with limited economic means until the advent of oil and gas, and with relatively little geopolitical relevance for our first 50 years of independence, Guyana has had to rely on diplomacy to hold its own against our more powerful neighbor. That we have been able to do so and even punch above our weight at times says a lot about the quality of our diplomacy over the years. Now, as an emerging petrostate and as a responsible member of the regional family and the international community, sitting next door to a country in freefall, Guyana has acquired unprecedented geoeconomic and geostrategic significance. This may be what has aroused Mr. Maduro's ire. For the purposes of this presentation, I will focus my comments in the context of Venezuela's hostile actions since September 2023, culminating in the latest series of outrages beginning in December 2024. This continuous process of escalation should be regarded against the backdrop of the selection by the UN Secretary General in January 2018 of the ICJ as the means of settling the border controversy, in keeping with the terms of the 1966 Geneva Agreement and Guyana's subsequent conduct of the case at the ICJ. I put it to you that with the Venezuelan political and economic situation continuing its precipitous decline, and with his regime's mishandling of the case, Maduro began a war of words in September 2023 to distract people from their daily woes and his own deep unpopularity. As is well known, he held a consultative referendum on December the 3rd, 2023, in defiance of the ICJ's provisional measures of December 1st, 2023, ordering Venezuela to refrain from taking any action which would modify the situation in Essequibo. The referendum paved the way for the creation of the so-called Guyana Essequibo state, effectively an illegal annexation of Guyanese sovereign territory by decree. In the face of Maduro's saber rattling and with tension and fears of invasion building, some CARICOM leaders persuaded President Irfan Ali of Guyana to meet urgently with Maduro in St. Vincent and the Grenadines that same December. The meeting allowed Venezuela to claim that bilateral discussions over the border were continuing, despite Guyana making it clear that the border was not up for discussion and that there was an ongoing process at the ICJ, bilateral processes long since having been exhausted. The advocates of the meeting hailed the resulting Argyle Declaration as de-escalating the crisis and setting the scene for peaceful relations between the two countries. Even though Guyana had not in any way threatened Venezuela, Argyle committed both countries to not threatening or using force directly or indirectly, being good neighbors, avoiding escalation, and establishing a joint commission of foreign ministers, which was illogically tantamount to a reopening of bilateral discussions parallel to the ICJ process. If the matter had ended there, Argyle would quite rightly have been considered a triumph of regional diplomacy. But almost immediately, Venezuela broke the agreement with troop buildups and the expansion of a military base on Ancocco Island on the border between Guyana and Venezuela, evident in satellite images reported by the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Caracas then moved to give legal effect to the results of the referendum with a unilateral decision in April 2024 that the 2/3 of Guyana it claims was now officially part of Venezuela and its Guyanese inhabitants, Venezuelan citizens. Then, in December 2024, a bridge linking the Venezuelan side of the Cuyuni River with its military outpost in Ancocco was completed and commissioned. In another assault on Guyana's sovereignty, Maduro announced on January 7, 2025, a plan to elect a governor of the Guyana Essequibo by the people of Guyana Essequibo. Regional elections in Venezuela are slated for May this year. The move on Ancocco and the plan to elect a Venezuelan governor of Guyana's Essequibo are further evidence of the contempt Maduro and his rogue regime hold for Argyle, the government and people of Guyana, and the international order. Significantly, CARICOM heads of government made a strong statement following their intersessional meeting in Barbados last month, expressing grave concern over Maduro's intention to elect a governor of Essequibo and urging Venezuela not to carry out these elections or, I quote, intrude in any other way in Guyana's sovereign territory, end of quote. Heads also condemned the February 17th attack on members of the Guyana Defense Force on the border. This was CARICOM's strongest statement yet in response to Venezuelan aggression and should have given pause to further Venezuelan provocations. Unfortunately, we all know what happened on March 1st when a Venezuelan warship approached tankers and an FPSO operating in the Stabroek block in Guyana's exclusive economic zone. It issued a radio warning declaring the area to be disputed international waters. This was the most flagrant violation of Guyana's maritime space since the Venezuelan Navy accosted and turned away seismic survey vessels in December 2018. It was also the first time that a Venezuelan incursion had occurred so far to the east, directly threatening offshore assets. Guyana's diplomatic response was immediate, securing strong statements of support from CARICOM and the international community. The United States in particular minced no words, stating, further provocation will result in consequences for the Maduro regime. Maduro has since called for an urgent meeting within the framework of the Argyle Agreement. President Ali has declared himself open to dialogue, but he'd prefer that the foreign ministers of the two countries meet first to agree on the objectives and agenda of a summit. A good diplomatic move. We wait with bated breath. In the meantime, I would like to put before you the following questions and points, my own personal Q&A, if you like, which you might like to discuss further with my colleagues and among yourselves when the time comes during the course of this afternoon. Firstly, why has Maduro decided to escalate provocations and tensions further? I believe that Maduro's posturing and the planned elections in May are mainly for domestic consumption, with hopefully little prospect of an actual invasion. He's trying to rally support around the flag on a deeply nationalistic issue before the farce of the regional elections. Unfortunately, his revolutionary rhetoric and downright insulting references to President Ali aren't confined to within Venezuela, and he seems not to care as to what might be the unintended consequences of his actions and words. Maduro's reference to President Ali as the Zelensky of the Caribbean may offer a further clue into his thinking. Maduro might have been emboldened by President Zelensky's disastrous meeting with President Trump and the sense that the United States would be unlikely to come to the aid of its allies. By approaching ExxonMobil's assets, however, he appears to have miscalculated, as seen in the robust statement issued by the US State Department. As to comparing President Ali to Zelensky, he seems to have been ironically unaware that most of the world views the latter as a hero. And as Sir Ronald Sanders has asked, if Ali is the Zelensky of the Caribbean, then who is the Putin? My next question for you to consider is, how strong is CARICOM's position with regard to Venezuelan actions? As mentioned earlier, the CARICOM statement coming out of the Barbados meeting was, in my view, the strongest one yet in response to Venezuelan aggression. Unfortunately, it did not serve to give pause to further Venezuelan provocations, as we saw on March the 1st. And notwithstanding CARICOM's repeated, I quote, unequivocal and unwavering support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Guyana, end of quote, and the immediate response to the March 1st incident, there were a few worrying nuances. Why, in the very first line of the statement, was the incursion into Guyana's EEZ referred to as an interaction with one of the oil platforms? This was no friendly encounter. It was a calculated violation of Guyana's maritime area and an unnecessary provocation, in addition to being in breach of international law and the Argyll Agreement, as was recognized in the statement. And why the excessively cautious diplomatic language in enjoining both Guyana and Venezuela, I quote, to avoid unnecessary confrontational actions, end of quote, and the call for, quote, patience, calm, and non-provocation on both sides, end of quote. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no record of Guyanese confrontation with or provocation of Venezuela. There is no justification for balancing alarm at Venezuela's actions and support for Guyana with calls to Guyana to play nicely. I continue to fail to understand how those who support the Argyll process believe that Maduro is genuinely interested in honoring the commitments he gave. His bluster and threats need to be addressed. He is the aggressor, and Venezuela is the threat to peace. Even in diplomacy, one does not appease a bully. Finally, what more can Guyana do? Until the GDF patrol was attacked on February 17th and the March 1st maritime incursion, Guyana's diplomacy was quite measured, low-key even, some might say, limited to calling in the Venezuelan ambassador in Georgetown to the foreign ministry, issuing diplomatic notes of protest, and apprising international organizations and the ICJ of Venezuela's actions. This was perhaps a reflection of the confidence of the government in the merits of its case at the ICJ, and a certain measure of satisfaction that it had enough US support to tread softly in the face of the most outrageous border provocations. But as I've argued, along with Greg Quinn, former British High Commissioner to Guyana, in an article published by Global Americans, there is need for more robust diplomacy, as we have been witnessing since March the 1st. Guyana should now escalate the matter, diplomatically, of course, highlighting the threat Venezuela poses to international peace and security. It is time to turn again to the UN Security Council, of which Guyana is currently a non-permanent member, as it did in April 2024, to protest Venezuela's actions aimed at annexing the Essequibo region. Let me be clear. We are not advocating a different means of settlement because Venezuela refuses to recognize the jurisdiction of the ICJ. Rather, we believe that recourse to the UNSC is necessary in light of Venezuela's continued provocations and defiance of international law. The UN Security Council would then be in a position to insist that Venezuela abide by the process selected by the UN Secretary General and the rulings of the ICJ. At the very least, it would show its desire for this issue to be settled by the body most relevant to doing so, that is, the ICJ. Bad and illegal behavior by Venezuela should not be accepted, especially when it has no justification historically or in the modern day. Time, therefore, for the Security Council to get involved and for Guyana to use all the diplomatic tools at its disposal. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your kind attention. I wish you an enjoyable discussion afterwards. And once again, please accept my regrets at not being able to be there with you live, but my thanks and sincere appreciation for the opportunity to raise these few points with you. Thank you very much.
Our next presenter is Mr. Greenidge, who is currently an advisor on borders in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Guyana's agent at the ICJ in the current Guyana-Venezuela border issue. An economist by training, he has served as Minister of Finance between 1983 and 1992 and Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. Please let us welcome Mr. Greenidge.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, distinguished invitees, representatives of the diplomatic corps. I apologize for not inverting that order, but please don't take it as an indication of lack of my regard for you, excellencies of the diplomatic corps. I would also like to say a word of thanks to the organizers for inviting me to share these moments with you this afternoon and commend you on the span of participants in terms of nationalities as well as even age. And I like the informal setting. It makes it a lot, I think, easier for presenters, maybe for you too. I just like also to say, express an appreciation to the previous speakers, all of whom had proposals or suggestions as to how we might alleviate the periodic crises that characterize the relationship. Okay, thanks. The relationship between Venezuela and Guyana, particularly of late. So, can I start by asking myself aloud, what is so special about one country claiming another's territory? What is significant about Venezuela's claims to Guyana's territory is this. Venezuela repudiated the award of 1899 after respecting it for over 63 years, not even wanting to move the border by an inch if the border cut a village in half or a river in half, and it didn't make sense. And now we find not only have they forgotten that they signed the agreements of 1897 1899. They were also parties to agreement in 1905, 1907, 1928 with Brazil, 1931 with Brazil. That means also, I'm not sure whose border it is. We're talking about Guyana-Venezuela border, but some of the agreements are signed between three countries. There's an expression in Creole which, like Kotai, talks about I pass, and this is a case of I pass. You sign an agreement. It's because I'm short. Your mic is too high. You sign an agreement with Guyana and Brazil, which identifies a common boundary on Roraima, for example. That's one of the places. And when you wake up a morning and decide that all this territory is yours, you don't go and tell Brazil to get moving. You don't attempt to seize their territory. You attempt to do that to one of the smallest countries, one of the two smallest countries in the subcontinent. You describe yourself as an avid pursuer of the socialist ethic. Okay? The thing is, perhaps to be a little more serious, there are many countries in this world which have problems with borders and say, well, they don't recognize this agreement, they don't recognize that agreement is null and void. But only only Venezuela seems to have a penchant for treating their unilateral declaration of nullity as authorization to take territory. If 2 or 3 countries sign a treaty, one country cannot unilaterally abrogate that treaty and lay claim not only to the territory that the treaty gave it, for example, the mouth of the Orinoco River, but also the Essequibo. This is what is special about this. So you are witnessing an exercise that infringes other countries' rights, but it is a discriminatory exercise of those rights. You don't take on the big brother in the region. So one doesn't have to be impressed by what Mr. Maduro does, as I think I see some of my colleagues sometimes say, oh, he's taking on United States and this and that and the other. But you're taking on also the minions, and this is a characteristic of bullyism. Okay, so that is a distinctive feature of the claim that is being made here. And I also want to say that when you see this going on, you ask yourself, but what is it that is driving Venezuela? Why would Venezuela, which is several times the size of Guyana, whose population density, other than in the area of Caracas, is as low as Guyana? And I say that because every time you see Venezuela and also Latins describe the Essequibo, they speak of sparsely populated. What does that mean? They're trying to say, well, if the territory is seized, not many people will be affected. It's not densely populated. But Venezuela itself, for most of Venezuela, is very sparsely populated also. Is it just a question of greed? Well, I think many people believe that. My predecessor as Minister had the belief that they were concerned about the implications of sharing a border with small and unstable countries in the Caribbean islands. And at any time they could be taken over by communists, Cubans, or whoever else. And therefore you need to remedy the coast so that you can perhaps marshal your military. I think, although I don't normally disagree with the late Rashley Jackson, I think the issue here has more to do with the strategic value of the land that we're looking at. That doesn't mean the economic value is of no significance, far from it. But the Essequibo runs the entire length of Guyana. And where it ends in the south is a few miles from the Suriname border, where the source of the Essequibo River is. Now, if you lay hands on one piece of territory, you immediately are in a position to lay control of Guyana, because Essequibo region accounts for, it's actually not 2/3. The lawyers use 2/3, but it accounts for 74% of Guyana's landmass. 74% of Guyana's landmass, which has implications for what is left. That's even without making reference to Suriname's ambitions. And the river itself drains something like 2/3 of Guyana. The Essequibo region runs Guyana's full length. So it is strategically important to Guyana, and it is strategically important for any other country that happens to control it, because they're going to have borders with Suriname, which they would not have otherwise had, and with Guyana, what is left of Guyana. It also, as it happens, gives you 300 to 400 miles of coast. It is land, it is the coast that gives you a right to an exclusive economic zone. An exclusive economic zone, for most of us, would be of interest because it enables you to control a whole range of natural resources, fisheries and so forth, and minerals. But an exclusive economic zone for a navy with ambition of being a global navy is a big thing, especially now that you become or you would like to become an Atlantic power. You can join the US and others with having your navies patrol the Atlantic. So there's a strategic dimension to this which we mustn't forget, which helps to explain why the sort of irrational obsession with territory that, when Venezuela participated in the arbitration deliberations of 1899, the major concern that seemed almost to bring their negotiators to tears was the threat of Britain owning and controlling the western bank of the Orinoco. Unlike Guyanese feel that the largest river in the world apart from the Amazon and the Orinoco is the Essequibo. Certainly in the region, it isn't. But I'm mentioning this just to say to you that for the countries in the region, these waterways are very, very important. When Venezuela was carrying out these negotiations and the arbitration, the point that I think the arbitrators absorbed most clearly and most firmly was the need for Venezuela not to find itself with a power outside of the region, and that's the sense in which the Monroe Doctrine was relevant. And not finding themselves where their main waterway and one of the waterways that was soon to become one of the most important transport, merchandise transport routes along with the Suez and others was to be the Panama Canal. And to the extent that you control that estuary of the Orinoco, you have some strategic special strategic points and advantages. I believe, and it's not my point to explain what the arbitral panel did, I believe that the panel took that into account. If you see the bits of Guyana that Britain had controlled, that had been moved from Britain to to Venezuela, you will see what the logic was to ensure that they didn't give the Orinoco to Venezuela and then have Britain control strategic entrance points to the Orinoco. You might ask yourself, if you look at the map, you have a map in front of you. If you look at the northwest, the top right-hand corner, there's a place. This is the only place in Guyana. Let me just see this. This is the only place in. I'm going to come back. You don't want me to stand next to the young lady. That's your problem, huh? This is the only place in Guyana that has a name vaguely Spanish. Point applier. If you see any other name that looks to you as though it's Spanish, forget it. It's Portuguese. And as I was saying to some colleagues earlier, although Venezuela claims to have spent as much time in Guyana as Spain spent in Trinidad and Tobago, the footprints you will find, Spanish footprints you will find in Guyana are practically non-existent, as opposed to the footprints you find in Trinidad and Tobago. That is one of the reasons why the Venezuelans are implacably opposed to going to the ICJ. But in fact, it's not only the ICJ they don't want to go to. They don't want to go to any court because the case is a joke. The case is extremely weak. And as you will have seen, as Dr. Kirton mentioned earlier, all the points brought to the court so far, yes, there were 2 instances, but the details underlying them have for the most part been rejected. You sign a Geneva Agreement. You have the Geneva Agreement. It has some signatures on it. Those signatures are signatures of Venezuelan representatives. Yet Venezuela could say to the court that it never committed itself to the court being party to any arrangement for the resolution of the controversy, what we're now calling a dispute. That's one of the reasons why I shared the document with you. If you look at Article 4 explains the powers of the Secretary General. The Secretary General has the power to choose the next means. The list of means isn't before you, but the list of means is Article 33 of the UN Charter. Article 33 of the UN Charter lists the various means which you will know, and they include arbitration. Okay? They include the court. That is what they call resort to judiciary. And yet Venezuela could brazenly, in arguing that it didn't accept the jurisdiction of the court, contend it didn't accept it because they never agreed to the court being involved in this exercise. That's one of the arguments that Venezuela put to the court. And let me tell you, that the most favorable decision of those taken by the court as regards Venezuela's pleas so far has been 8-4. The other matter, you had, of the judges that were there, 12 votes against Venezuela and 1 for. And I passed you also a list of judges, and the list of judges has been passed to you so that you can see that each region of the world is represented on the court. The judges have been elected by their regions, including Latin America. The current judge for Latin America and the Caribbean there is a Mexican. Okay? Not on the Argyle Agreement, I didn't share that with everyone, but there is a list of pictures of the judges, my apologies. A list of pictures of the judges who currently are to be found on the court. The president of the court has recently been changed. He's now been appointed as the president of Lebanon. And he's been replaced by a Japanese jurist. But the point I'm making is that the judges are not randomly selected. They're not selected because they're American or because the American president likes them or they work someplace for the State Department. They're all elected on the basis of outstanding judicial experience and performance. And they don't vote for their countries. Once they're appointed to the court, the 15 judges plus 1 appointed by each of the, if you like, the contending countries, that is Guyana and Venezuela. There's no Guyana judge on the court, there's no Venezuelan judge on the court, but we each can appoint what is called a judge ad hoc. And it's the responsibility of that judge ad hoc to look after your business, to explain your case, and to explain to the court the principles he understands that it might be overlooking or that it needs to look at in dealing with your case. That's the function of the ad hoc judge. And the judgments of the court, and they've had, I think, since the Second World War, 140-something cases, they don't bandy together on an ideological basis and vote against the country. Those that, for example, didn't vote with the majority in the case of Guyana include Italy, France, and Morocco, and a couple of others. They're not all the developing countries vote for anyone, or all the countries to the south. So why would you say that you don't accept the court? You have signed an agreement, the Geneva Agreement, that says the court can mediate, but you don't accept the court. But I'm saying to you, you can see for yourself that the court isn't biased in the way that Venezuela tries to suggest. The reason I'm suggesting to you has to do with the fact that they have no case. Because the other answer is Venezuela doesn't want to embarrass Guyana by going to the court and having Guyana lose its case. I don't believe anybody's that generous. Not even people from the Caribbean and Latin America. Nobody's going to say, well, I wouldn't carry it to court because the court is just going to beat you up. I will go and make silly arguments myself, obviously false arguments myself, so that I can get beaten up instead. That's what we're facing. So this case is a very peculiar one. It is a case, because it is unique in many ways, and this is almost a contradiction, many, many issues are raised. So I can't even begin to wander too far from a note I've scribbled here as a short version of what I have on the computer, because we'll be here until tomorrow morning or longer. I want to say that when you hear the arguments of Venezuela on this matter, you will hear Exxon in the United States, Exxon and the United States. Oil and the United States. Exxon, United States, and Guyana. What is being said here? If you look at the 28 vessels that Mr. Maduro claims his warships saw on the shelf, they are associated with Exxon. Sure enough, Exxon is the contractor. So Exxon operates on behalf of Guyana and who else? Hess, an American company. You don't hear them cussing out Hess, but it's there, and when they get a chance, they do. But are you aware that CNOOC, that is the Chinese National Overseas Petroleum Company, is one of the partners with Exxon? If so, how come only Exxon, Guyana, United States get cussed out? How can that be? This is a very jaundiced, even for propaganda, very jaundiced propaganda being projected into the region and the rest of the world. CNOOC, CNOOC, the Chinese company, okay, it doesn't have an insignificant share. It holds something like 25% of the shares of the operation. Okay? And that company is Chinese, and it also operates where? In Venezuela. So I don't understand what is being said about the significance of the companies and their nationality when some of the same companies, including Chevron, which has been seeking to try and acquire the shares owned by Hess, when Chevron itself has been assisting Venezuela to get foreign exchange that Venezuela would not have been able to have access to if the initial sanctions of the United States against Venezuela had been continuously imposed. Is that making sense to you? I mean, is it that I'm a little deranged? I haven't had any alcohol today. No young ladies to twist up my head. So I'm not confused. At least I hope that. But let me tell you something else. This very country, its leadership, because it's the leaders, which contends that it is such a friend, because they make a point that they are friends of the Guyanese. It's only the leaders of Guyana they have a problem with, and the United States, and because the leaders don't know how to look after their own national interests. This country happens to have, and the court case is not about maritime zone, but let me make mention of the maritime zone. This country happens to have claims against the maritime zones of no less than 8 Caribbean countries. I'm not talking about Colombia. I'm speaking of Caribbean countries. What do I mean? The small Caribbean states, including St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dominica, Suriname. I suspect that some of you don't believe me. And I'm reaching for my holster, like a Wild West gangster. Because somebody sent me something this morning. You would have been reading, and Dr. Riyad Ali would have been telling you that even he doesn't tell you the whole story. Venezuela is harassing Guyana, they're doing all these terrible things. And I sent a note this morning, and the note says, it is an unofficial translation. Venezuela claims Block 58 of Suriname. Does that mean anything to you? Do you know Block 58, madam? Well, let me tell you. The Stabroek Block is the famous block on the Guyana side of the border. Stabroek There are many others, but Stabroek is the one that the 11 billion barrels of oil is associated with, and it's probably more, but anyway, that's what matters. It is the biggest find in this part of the world, and it's the biggest find in recent years of petroleum and gas and oil reserves. Suriname is a country that is as problematic for Guyana as is Venezuela, but not in the same way. If we do something, Suriname wants to do it. If we play football, they want to play it. And if you go to Paramaribo, you will see people playing cricket even. What am I saying? Because we have this resource that we've discovered. Suriname has gone and discovered a resource on the other side of the border. If you look at your map, this I know you have, there is to the eastern part of your, no, I don't need it. To the eastern part of your map, a red line, or the two parallel red lines running north-south. And there is a box, a rectangle to the right-hand side of the map or to the eastern side of the map. That is a rectangle of the point where the petroleum exploration or development vessels were intercepted by Venezuela. What is significant about that? The red line to the east is the boundary between Suriname and Guyana. It's nowhere near Caracas. Caracas is about 1,000 and something kilometers from there. Do you understand what I'm saying? Guyana's maritime boundary with Venezuela is nearly 350 kilometers. In the other direction, what are Venezuelan vessels doing there? What claims can Venezuela have to a Surinamese asset that lies just on the other side of the border? The rectangle that you see is about 86 kilometers from Guyana, Suriname maritime boundary. And yet Suriname finds itself with an asset like Guyana. Venezuela is claiming it. It says it's territory. I'm only reporting to you what I've seen in the newspaper, so I hope I haven't been misled. But it's a credible paper. And what I'm saying to you fits in with the other point I made earlier. No less than 8 Caribbean countries find their EZs being claimed by Venezuela. And in 2016, I was the person that drew the attention of the Caribbean countries to that fact in circumstances where they seem to believe an explanation by Venezuela. Oh, the maps that you see that Dr. Kirton mentioned about the decrees 1787 and the other 5 decrees, these Venezuela explained were mistakes. It's a slip of the wrist or incompetence by the naval men. So don't worry. And then when it was pointed out to them that all their territories are on the Venezuelan maps with those presidential decrees, you heard another story. Suriname said, well, yeah, we did see it, and we asked them about it, and they said, don't worry about that. This story is only about Guyana. Only about Guyana. You know what a Nancy story is. Throughout the Caribbean, you'll all know what a Nancy story is. And that is a Nancy story. A Nancy story is a story that is untrue. It's a made-up story to keep you amused and entertained and perhaps even diverted. And that is what you have to be careful with in dealing with these things coming out of Venezuela. The other point I want to make is the process of the ICJ. The ICJ has a process which is different from your normal municipal courts. We have enjoined that process. It was Guyana that laid a complaint before the court. And contrary to what you will see in the Venezuelan publications and all other publications, many other publications, including those coming out of the US and some of them coming out of the Caribbean, Guyana did not go unilaterally to the court. We didn't wake up a morning like some leaders in this region and say, oh gosh, I got a brainwave. Let me go to the court. It was part of a process Dr. Kirton described, begun in 2017, called a process of enhanced mediation. And when Venezuela cusses out Secretary General Gutierrez for choosing under Article 4 of the Geneva Agreement, the ICJ, he forgets that the Geneva Agreement authorizes that selection by the Secretary General if the two parties can't agree. And do you know something? The two parties have never agreed anything since 1970. They've never agreed on anything pertaining to how the matter of the border dispute is to be resolved. So when Mr. Maduro says, look, we can solve this matter bilaterally, he's a joker. Surely, if you haven't been able to do it so in 62 years or more, what is different? What is it that will, Argyle? Just the name of a place? Or the perfumes of St. Vincent? Or of Caracas? We will see. We will see. This is not the problem. The problem is Venezuela, and this is the reason why the matter cannot be solved by simply dialogue. And certainly I hear our colleague, Mr. Correa, suggesting as a resolution bilateral discussions. Didn't I hear that from Mr. Maduro? Well, bilateral discussions were tried. There have been bilateral discussions, 4 years of bilateral discussions from 66 to 70. Continuous bilateral discussion from 70 onwards. You had, under the aegis of the Secretary General of the UN, bilateral discussions under the rubric of what is called enhanced mediation, where Venezuela says, yes, we want to talk to them. If you organize for us to speak to them alone, they surely cannot refuse these ideas we have. We stayed in Whitehaven. I'm only now going to learn that it's not in Scotland. It's in New York somewhere, upstate New York. Has a lot of fancy stuff, fancy accommodation, nice pictures. Even the Venezuelan delegation found the picture and said, there you are. This is proof that the maps we have are correct and Guyanese are fabricated. But at that location, we were locked away from distractions. There were supposed to be 3 days of discussion on proposals, and 2.5 days passed. No proposals came out of Venezuela. The proposals that emerged on the last day were not written, and the proposals were completely unacceptable, and they ended right there. So when you say that bilateral discussions will resolve the matter, be very, very careful. Let us not be naive. If you have a giant, and I'm not one who discriminates on the basis of height, because there are short giants and others. But if you have a giant and you put him in a ring or her to work with somebody challenged height-wise, you don't expect them to be able to deliver the same. And it is the same institutionally. You put a country like Venezuela alongside Guyana alone, especially if you look at what has happened over the years. When Guyana has been in discussions with Venezuela, every time, whether it is 1970, whether it's 2013, 2014, 2015, or 2023, when they've had discussions and Venezuela seeks to have discussions that say we must discuss the transfer of Essequibo. And Guyana said, we're not interested. You immediately get the mobilization of military forces on your borders, ships, and so forth. All of those breaches and crises are associated with that particular matter. And the refusal of Guyana to discuss the border matter arises, if you look, I don't have the note here, but if you look at the statement by Britain's representative, the deputy ambassador to the UN in 1962, when they were discussing and agreed to move towards the Geneva Agreement to resolve the matter in some way of Venezuela's claims about the resolution of 1899 being somehow unacceptable. The British representative made it very, very clear. He says, I want it to be clearly understood. We are not, and I'm using my own words now, we are not inviting you or opening the door here to a renegotiation of the border. And we are not agreeable to that because we don't believe any justification has been provided for such renegotiation. And yet, Venezuela, having embraced the press release that captured that sentiment in 1962, runs around the world to neighbors in the region, Brazil, St. Vincent, whoever else, saying to them, let us talk. All we need to do is to talk and we'll resolve the matter. Are we serious? But this is what lies behind this problem of a suggestion that all you need to do is have bilateral discussions. If you have a case and you can make the case because it's sound, why are you refusing to make it before a court which is impartial or a third party who is not involved? Why are you afraid of others listening? Why are you afraid of others being involved and hearing what the negotiation is? No, you want to have a captive audience. No, I don't want to spend any time on Argyle. It's got its own headaches and challenges. But Venezuela's objective since the court and the processes I've been talking about have started was to derail the court process. And why they want it derailed is because they want the conclusion of the process to be one in which there is just bilaterals between Venezuela and Guyana. Simply bilaterals between the two of them. And if you look at the Argyle architecture, nothing coming out of that architecture suggests any definitive resolution of any problem that will go into that room. No, my colleagues who are involved in that exercise will not be happy to hear me say so. But I'm not the only one saying it. It is architecture with a problem. If the Good Offices Program, encountered problems and it had a definitive end to it, because in the end, the Secretary General under the Argyle Agreement is mandated to choose the next means of resolution if the two sides can't agree. There is no such provision in Argyle. Whatever it says, there's no meaningful provision there. And we know how this region operates. You're operating with a set of politicians who have to keep each, as somebody would say, they'll have to rub each other's head. So they can't afford to upset each other. No decision comes out of a meeting of that kind on a matter that is so sensitive. So the ICJ process has a number of stages. Those stages can be breached by a number of measures. And this has actually happened. I'm not doing this in sequence, so forgive me. I hope I'm not confusing you. If you go to the ICJ, as we have, the ICJ has first to satisfy itself that it has jurisdiction to consider the case and to make a decision on the case you brought to it. Okay? You've had that process in relation to this case of the dispute. And the dispute is whether or not the arbitration decision is valid. It's no other dispute. It's nothing to do with the maritime zone. It's nothing to do with whether Venezuela has enough land, whether Venezuela got the land fairly or not. It is a simple question. Is the 1899 award valid? In law, and you have at least one law in the room as far as I'm aware, there are a number of criteria that help in the determination of validity or nullity of an award. The concept is not unknown in municipal law, that is within national borders, but at the international level, there are accepted criteria. So if Venezuela believes that the award was null and void, why in the period between 1962 and now can they not bring to the court or bring to a forum, because they could have brought it to the mixed commission of 1966 that sat for 4 years, never saw a single submission from Venezuela on this matter, but it is the basis on which they're saying that the agreement is null and void, but you don't bring the evidence. Venezuela does not want the evidence to be examined forensically. So it's avoided over all these years every opportunity, every opening to have the evidence examined. Now, one of the reasons may be, I don't want to suggest any malicious intent, one of the reasons may be that although Mr. Severo Maleprevost, who is the person that Dr. Kirton made reference to as writing a letter or a memorandum suggesting malfeasance on the part of arbitrators, we don't know for sure that he actually did write that letter. We do not know, you hearing me? We do not know for sure that an allegation as serious as this, that has already led to the loss of lives, was actually written by the man who they say made these allegations. And Mr. Maleprevost was not a saint anyhow. That is perhaps why he got the national award, and within a month of the national award being received, this allegation about the other members of the arbitration panel was made. Isn't there something funny about that? You get a national award, you work for a country for how many years? Since 1899. And the only descriptions you can find about him in relation to his behavior in Latin America, and he was a Mexican by birth. Not that that makes any difference, but I see a lot of people like to say, well, he's American. He had a reputation. For instance, he did not pay the American lawyers who worked for Venezuela. He didn't pay them, although he got the money to pay them from wherever he should have got the money from. Never paid them. So you're dealing with a lot of unknowns. There's a claim that one member of the panel influenced another. I had an interesting discussion with the Russian ambassador some years ago on this matter. I said to him, where do you stand on this matter? Well, you know, being a good diplomat, he took some time to respond. I didn't want to allow him time to get himself into any difficulty. So I said to him, do you know that the allegation being made about this case is about malfeasance on the part of a man by the name of Dimasens, or Masens, depends on whether you call him by his Russian name or Latvian name or whatever. And he says, yes, he's aware of. And he said, they better not make that allegation in my hearing, because the man was a Russian. So you're in a situation. You're in a situation where such serious allegations are made with implications for all other people, and it has never been properly examined. And that's what we're going to, we're being invited to go to war over, or to yield 74% of our land mass for, plus the exclusive economic zone. One very last point, very quickly. The EZ, the maritime zone, is not part, it's not, the court isn't being asked to pronounce on this. But, as I say, if you define a coast, then you are defining the owner of the maritime zone off the coast. And the issue here that Venezuela is seeking to sell, again, if you look at your map, you see two red lines going northwest, and then one veers to the west. The lines show the accepted boundaries of Guyana vis-a-vis Venezuela, in the maritime zone vis-a-vis Suriname. The line to the east, that is the one to the right, was not fashioned by Guyana. It was fashioned by the UNCLOS arbitration panel after Guyana and Suriname couldn't agree over the line. Now, what was it I said about Venezuela and Suriname and Block 58? Do you remember? Block 58 is on the other side of the line. It's on the eastern side of the red line. So although the UN and the Law of the Sea Tribunal has defined the boundary Guyana-Suriname, Venezuela is saying, to hell with them. The stuff on the east of that line is ours. That is what the note from my holster says. Venezuela's EZ is a unique EZ. It is an EZ that starts between Trinidad and Tobago and the Venezuelan coast. Yeah, you can see it there. You see this very odd line. This is why I don't like to speak maritime, because it gets so exciting. You see this line? It runs between Trinidad and Tobago and the Venezuelan coast, and then it goes east. When Venezuela itself is finished with that, now I don't know why it should run that way, but when Venezuela itself is finished with that line, Venezuela's claim of an EZ runs down. It's not on here. It runs this way. The rectangles runs down this way. So it happens to take in all the areas of petroleum potential, including Stabroek, Block 58. That's why they're talking about Block 58, because they have redefined their rights, notwithstanding what the world has agreed, what the UNCLOS parties have agreed and signed in 1982. They are above the law. They don't have to live with that law. So they can now claim other people's petrocarbon reserves simply because they can't draw a straight line. In this particular case, the problem they claim is right. They are making one claim. That is that the red line, this one, is not actually settled between Guyana and Venezuela. In 2013, Venezuela seized the vessel called Anadarko. That vessel was seized and taken to a Venezuelan harbor, Margarita. And when Guyana suggested, look, let us try and solve this matter by agreeing, because there's a methodology for agreeing the drawing of the line. These are midpoints, midpoints along the boundary on either side, which is how this one was formed. we can agree this between ourselves, and then Venezuela says, no, we have to agree the land boundary first. Well, we agree with them. You have to agree the land boundary first. But there's a methodology that can be used until such time as the land boundary is agreed. And many countries do it. There are rules. When you decide to do anything such as drill within these two lines, you are required to ensure that the drilling on the undefined boundary doesn't come within 140 miles. There are rules like that, okay? Guyana lives within those rules. It's notified Venezuela, it's notified the UN, and therefore there is no justification for you to wake up a morning and show that you are more bad than Wild Bill Hickok. You know, you can whip your guns out of your holsters before anybody can blink. It's unnecessary, it's inappropriate, it's dangerous. Guyana has rights too. When you have assets in your EZ, you are entitled to take action to protect them. So that's what I want to say about the EZ story. The suggestion shouted into the microphone earlier this week by President Maduro about Guyana, it is illegal. It sounds very good, but this is propaganda. Propaganda, it means that you don't have to take any notice of it because it is fabricated. It is, the justification is simply born of a Nancy story. Okay, Brer Nancy is very popular in the Caribbean, but it's still a Nancy story. It's a make-up story, right? So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. I don't want to hold you much longer. I just want to say thank you for listening. And I hope that the issues are now somewhat clearer. In some ways, they are very simple, but sometimes the person that tells a fabricated story has an easier error because it's fabricated to persuade you. It's not the truth. The truth very often has complications and causes life to be more difficult. So thanks very much for your attention, and please enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you very much for a very insightful presentation by all our panelists. I would like to open the floor to questions from our face-to-face audience and those who are online with us. Yes. Do we have an extra mic?
Okay. Hello? Hello? Go ahead. Okay. So this is in response to a security approach, really. So hearing the calls for a multinational security force and CARICOM's passive response and approach, how feasible would it be for a joint multinational security force to actually be in Guyana in response to the border issue with Venezuela? And I asked, noting that the CARICOM community has a lackluster response for security concerns, for example, in Haiti. And then part two is it actually responsible to engage foreign UNSC powers, for example, the US and the UK in this, noting Venezuela's anti-imperialism stance?
Yeah, I have advocated for, first of all, the enhancement of the regional security system, the RSS, into a broader CARICOM response and team and unit. Since I believe that Guyana has to demonstrate in the context of the increasing escalation in intimidatory action that it is prepared to defend its territory, even if only temporarily. There's no match, indeed, between Guyana and Venezuela in terms of its military capability and asset base. But I believe that if you're looking to, if the situation arises in which there's armed military intervention, while we will have to look for allies in the process, I believe in the first instance, there must be some holding capacity, which could be done by the RSS, enhanced RSS, a larger grouping. At the same time, while we recognize that there could be the presence of the United States, my view is that this sphere of influence idea, and which might, they look at the Caribbean as the backyard and the sole presence of a United States military, may not necessarily be the desired impact. And I go forward to say I'm not sure that the US boots on the ground is something that they will want to deal with at this time, especially I listened to the statements of President Trump in relation to the Ukraine issue, and I'm not sure where they are, whether and if there's going to be any kind of transactionalist approach. But I believe that Guyana has to be prepared for an eventuality, and we can surely look for, to my mind, the enhancement of the regional security system, since the fourth pillar, as I mentioned, of the CARICOM integration effort is security of its member states. So in that sense, in that context, I believe that is one of the recommendations for consideration. Now the process, I believe, we may look outside of that to see whether or not a hemispheric approach could be possible, looking for a deterrence force, an advanced military mission as the threats become more significant, and to include not only the Caribbean, but I mentioned an enhanced deterrence mission under the aegis of the United Nations or one of the other agencies, international agencies. Because I think it's becoming significant enough for the enhancement of Guyana's military asset base and for the broadening of the security system as we presently see it.
I would like to add a small dissenting voice, in a sense, to that. Dissenting in this sense, that if you are heading a country and it's facing the prospect of a neighbor overrunning it, that neighbor has no right whatsoever to ask you to give them the assurance that you are not going to seek assistance from any quarter that will help you. Because it is the uncertainty as to what will happen to them that actually keeps them at bay. Once you give them the assurance, an assurance like, oh, we will never have foreign forces in Guyana, you're dead. That is what they want. There is no problem logistically with organizing a multilateral force. it has happened many times. Pardon me. And it can happen. We don't have to depend upon one ally. The question is whether the allies with the capability, the problem in this case is not so much physical bodies, although that's part of the problem, but it's probably what the military call assets, ability to move people, move them quickly, to get equipment in the right place, to undertake surveillance before mishaps occur. You have to ask, I mean, I don't want to be invidious by naming countries, but our only ally is not only in the region. It is for Guyana to use its diplomatic muscle, if it has any, to mobilize such assistance, to persuade people that there's danger and assistance is needed. But in the circumstances, therefore, I don't think the government should be asked to tell you that has happened. Are you going to invite the United States? No, I don't think that deserves an answer. I don't think that deserves an answer. Now, I know, let me say this, that I know that some of our allies in the region are very concerned that this shouldn't happen. But the same allies have watched Iran provide resources, training, and equipment to Venezuela. Guyana has no defense treaty with any country in the world. I'm not able to tell you that Venezuela has no defense treaty. I can't tell you that because it's not true. So you had after Argyle a situation in which a British vessel came into Guyana waters. And the Guyana government was attacked for threatening peace in the region. Now, let me start by saying this. Whilst I respect a lot of my political colleagues, sometimes they do talk nonsense. You cannot call a space a zone of peace if some country in that region is under military threat. How can it be a zone of peace? So I'm under military threats. I've got no treaties with anyone, but the country that wants to attack me has treaties. We have had T-160 bombers, Tupolev bombers that can carry nuclear bombs in this region, not all that far from Guyana. We have had countries that participated or approved the US invasion of Grenada, telling us about, I wouldn't call the word, let us say illiberal political systems. Guyana never agreed with the invasion of Grenada, but I can name some countries, including the one that runs about the place saying, oh, this, that, and the other. It isn't what we say that matters so much, it's what we do. And if you are in the business of threatening us, we have a right to defend ourselves. And we have no obligation to tell you how we're going to defend ourselves. That's madness. So part of the problem, I mean, I'm saying to you, I agree entirely with your suggestion, the question you asked, should Guyana seek to put together an alliance to defend itself? And I would say, of course. And I think Dr. Kirton is saying the same. But I'm saying that when you get desperate, anything can happen. It is the If you have a friend and a burglar or a murderer has invaded that friend's house or bedroom, it is your responsibility as a friend to let them know if you can and will provide them with assistance so they can act appropriately. You can't say nothing and then you get angry when they call somebody else to defend them because you don't like the somebody else. That is what's happening in this region.
Thank you for your response. Any more questions?
I just think that the question is a very interesting one. I mean, I have spent some time going back to look at the Anglo-Dutch agreement prior, and then the imposition of the Monroe Doctrine in the area, and the whole discussion before the case you all talked about. And it's very clear, as coming from a small country like yourself, which was Spanish at one time and then taken over by the British, that we are small players in a big field here. I would much rather that we go to CELAC or South America for a sphere of influence, because as Ambassador Insanally said, the whole global system is in turmoil. We have two parallel systems. We have a continuation of the Monroe Doctrine playing out in our area. Venezuela itself doesn't have an international sanction. It has an American sanction, which prevents it from dealing with us in Trinidad. We have to negotiate with the Americans to deal with Venezuela. Very often we are now being told that we can't get doctors from Cuba. So I think we have to move very carefully. I'm not saying that we shouldn't find ways to defend ourselves, but that we have to be very careful of this Anglo-American treaty and procedure, which has got us very often in the hot waters that we are in today, right? I'm just saying some of the things we are. So while we have to defend ourselves, we have to understand that the ICJ, certain people, they follow the ICJ ruling when it suits them, and we have right now in other parts of the world where it's not being taken on, the same people. So we can't go to the people, we can't be going to the ICJ to get a legitimate ruling that will be in our favor, which Guyana apparently has a case. But go to the people, defend it, the ones who are denying the jurisdiction of the ICJ and other jurisdictions that are going on right now in the world. If we want a just world system, we have to be careful of how we choose the different types of interventions to resolve the system in. And I like the recommendation that we go towards a hemispheric one, all right, with strength in the hemisphere, because that is where I think our long-term stability and long-term justice will come from. I'm just making that comment, and I don't know if you want to respond to that.
I would only say to you that a hemisphere is a collection of political leaders. And that means that last week they were on the left, and this week they may be in the middle, not willing to help you. So you are right as to how politics, swings from one side to the next, but it is the reality that as a political leader, you have to make a decision based on the best information available to you at the time. And that is why allies have to say whether they're allies, and that is why when you are in trouble, you recognize that you don't have the time. If your allies, CELAC is one thing. I've worked closely with CELAC.
I'm just thinking that we could go to solve a problem that we've inherited from this colonial world order and throw ourselves into a new colonial, imperial new world order and find ourselves in a worse problem. So we have to be careful when we solve one problem. We're not creating another problem.
I have no problem with that. You are quite right. You only say you don't say don't do something, you said be careful.
I said, okay.
And I'm saying as a politician,
yeah,
you are judged by your capacity to make decisions. If you are worried, you're not sure whether it's the right decision, and you sit on your hands, you're going to find yourself burnt in one or other way, either by your constituency or by the people across the border. So I'm not disputing what you say. I'm simply saying the practicality of it. Has CELAC or Latin America said to Guyana, we are prepared to render you assistance? It hasn't. At a time when Venezuelan vessels are over the border, at a time when Venezuelan footprints and boots have come over the border, as a time when Guyanese are killed. That may be a reflection of the failure on the diplomatic front on our part. So we have to bear that in mind.
But remember, the same country that you're going to help is the one that has a history of boots on the ground across the region.
I'm not fighting you on that, you know. I'm simply
They're
saying...
the ones who have been invading other people's countries and imposing their will.
I'm simply saying...
Next thing you know, they come and they take your place too.
They may do that anyway. I think that
Sorry.
there is no there is no saint in the world of international relations. There's no saint. And the same country that now tells you Venezuela had no problem with the invasion of Grenada, you know that. They voted in support of it. You may not remember, but it's a fact. None of us, as my mother said, nobody got hair in their hands. So you can't, by looking at the country, believe it to be a saint. You have to judge on their performance. You have to judge on the basis of performance. And friendship is not simply a psychic condition. When your friend is subject to violence or subject to some abuse, you need to demonstrate your friendship by coming to their assistance. You may say the time isn't right, but when's the time? When I've already had my teeth kicked in? The reality is that we live in a world that is not very kind. And even the people that help in the end often do it late and leave you damaged. I don't have to mention names because there will be many around. And the scandal of Haiti at this point in time is I don't even want to mention to depress anybody at this time of the day. But it also means that if you see your, as they say in Creole, if you see your neighbor house burning, you got to go get some water and throw it on. So it is not only for you to, it is not only for us. It's not only a challenge facing Guyana. Guyana's friends must help Guyana by speaking up on Guyana's behalf if they think Guyana needs assistance. As Guyana also has, even when it has no problems, recognize that it has a duty to look around and see when its friends are in trouble, render them assistance. And that's why you have functioning ministries of foreign affairs and other institutions. It's not just to send them to meetings when you need help. It is to have them there all the time, monitoring what is going on, so that when a neighbor is in need of assistance, you recognize that early, and you can lend to them a word of comfort or go and speak on their behalf someplace. We don't always do this. And CARICOM, which has, CARICOM, for example, was the country that wrote to Venezuela in 2016 under the chairmanship of Erskine Sandiford, Prime Minister of Barbados, to say, look, hands off of these resources of the Caribbean. That is how they responded to Venezuela. They don't always do that. They don't always do it on time. It depends on the leader. It depends on the mood in the room. It depends on whether you foolishly cuss them out a week before. You may not even remember. But these are human beings. And they behave like human beings at times. So, yes, I agree with you. You don't really want to jump out to the frying pan into the fire, but you have to look and weigh your decisions carefully. This arena of international relations, foreign relations, call it what you will, is a very tricky and difficult one. And many leaders fail. not because they're not competent, but because at a particular point in time, odds happen to be against them. Sometimes you don't see it coming. But the general point you make about looking carefully before you do, I have no difficulty. That is what must be done.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Any more questions on the floor?
Young ladies have it, it seems.
Hello? Okay, it's working. So my question then is, because we're talking about how CARICOM can play a more active role, I want to know what role can TNT as a key CARICOM member, because TNT is a big, it's a big island compared to all the smaller countries. So how can TNT as a key CARICOM member with a strong diplomatic tie with Venezuela play in mediating of influencing a more constructive dialogue that prioritizes peaceful resolution over, this political rhetoric, or what you suggested or claimed a propaganda? That's my question.
You are right. I did claim it as propaganda, and I will stand by that claim. Trinidad and Tobago. Now, what can I say about Trinidad and Tobago? Trinidad and Tobago is a very troublesome country in this region. I'm sure you know that. But you are right. It is one with considerable skills, often not properly utilized by the region itself, and with a positive attitude towards things regional. I can't say that of all. You talk about big islands. I can't say that of all the big islands in the region. So it has that going for it. It often gets, I think, embroiled with its own internal difficulties. That is a function of big countries have that problem. Even the small big ones. Trinidad can use its resources by speaking, attending meetings and participating in those meetings, speaking to its colleagues, ensuring that it's properly briefed, and the like. This is what is required. And sometimes you need to try and win more positions on the international front, so that you are recognized and people will say, yeah, that's Trinidad and Tobago. They have a principle. They've worked with that principle. It is the small countries that have to do most work in that regard. It is the small ones, because if you don't have the rule of law, it's the small countries that get flattened. And that's what you're seeing. That is what you're seeing today. Whether it is in Europe or in the Caribbean or Latin America. And we have to defend ourselves against that by pulling together, and even pulling individually where you have the wherewithal, where you have the capacity and power. This region, between the bigger countries, it's not to say the smaller ones haven't, but in the past, the Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, Guyana have exercised influence far beyond their weight, their demographic weight. And I don't have the impression that they're not willing to do it anymore. It's just that at times, we just seem to allow internal issues to blind us to the needs outside. I think all the Caribbean countries, right now, including Trinidad and Tobago, which has skills in this regard, should, for example, look at the problems facing Haiti and try to help fashion a response. I know that and that's what Venezuela is hoping to happen to Guyana, when these difficulties persist, somebody says, oh God, I'm going to be invaded, I'm being invaded. You say it this week, you say it next week, you say it the week after, what happens? People tired, they don't want to hear. But that is the purpose of Venezuela's actions, to ensure that the international community becomes blind or deaf to our pleas. And we don't want what is happening to Haiti. It is true that you have a problem, a governance problem in Haiti that has allowed them to collapse so many times. But it's also true, as I think was being suggested, that some of the people that came to help, destroyed, and some of them that didn't come to help also destroyed, because their intention in coming was destruction. That has befallen Haiti from the very beginning. And some of those countries that should help Haiti don't even remember that Haiti had offered to assist its neighbors, and even Napoleon Bonaparte at one stage, to help them to fight off enemies, because it had mustered such skills in fighting not only malaria and so forth, typhoid, but also enemies of the state. And we actually don't give them credit for that. Solutions in terms of human relations isn't always easy to find. But I'm embracing your proposal that Trinidad and the others use their resources, bearing in mind the needs of the region. The smallest, the baddest, the weakest, all deserve assistance. Because we're small and we know what happens when you're not, before the Haitian Revolution, when Guyana had its own revolt, you had the entire European armada of vessels in the region sail to Berbice to put down a rebellion there. The entire Dutch, which of course is where the problem was, French, English, all of them reached there very quickly to go and shoot and kill whoever they thought were their enemies.
Post-independence revolution as well.
Indeed.
Well, look, I just want to, if you don't mind, I just want at this stage to bring us back to the current situation. Trinidad is the lead country in the quasi-cabinet for CARICOM on security. My view is that Trinidad could move forward with this enhanced regional security system. Trinidad is not a member of RSS, Guyana is, and the smaller states with limited capacity. I believe that Trinidad could fashion a structure that could enhance the RSS and be seen as one of the first deterrent elements in any movement towards incursion into Guyana's territory. So we're talking here about a broader CARICOM and a commitment from CARICOM, and one of the pillars of its security, which include all the states of CARICOM. So Trinidad as security, the country responsible for security, could be in the forefront of that effort to enhance the RSS with all of the states.
I got the impression at one stage, just to build on what you say, that Trinidad felt that when it got that position, this is around 2016, 2017, a bit earlier, that the CARICOM territories said, Trinidad got money, let them fund whatever is needed on the security front. And I got the impression they got fed up with that. So the rest of the countries in the region also need to be responsible in that regard.
I have a question kind of branching off of that, feeding into what you're saying. We're kind of talking about what Trinidad and Tobago can do in this, but we've launched discussions as well as looking at what happened with Haiti and wanting to avoid that. And I think it's interesting that we're talking about what Trinidad can do to further support Guyana, while also recently having officially signed SOFA with the US and having our Dragon oil deal with Venezuela. We have positioned ourselves in ways, part of it is working with Venezuela, doing that kind of anti-imperialist stance by siding with a country that has American sanctions on it. But at the same time, we're signing agreements with the that if we're going to be talking about Haiti, we also have to consider the 20th century destabilization of Haiti at the hands of the U.S. What position is Trinidad in now? How do we actively launch that discussion in our role with treating with Guyana when we've kind of posited ourselves as, you could almost say, being more willing to actually work with Venezuela or work with imperial nations that will not actually help Guyana but can further disadvantage them?
In fact, it was Eric Williams who drew the region's attention first to Venezuela's ambition as regards imperial dominance of this Caribbean world of ours. So it's good you raised that question, because this is the place where the awareness of the dangers first arose. And I don't know I have a simple answer. I mean, the thing is, we have to talk to each other. You have a project. What upset Eric Williams, for example, was the attempt to build the regional smelter, bauxite and so forth, aluminum smelter, that was derailed by Venezuela and others. And he was very angry. But part of that has to do, perhaps we're not candid enough in working with each other. You have to recognize what interests and what hazards. It's not only military threats individual countries face. So Venezuela, if Trinidad and Tobago faces threats in terms of investment and so forth. You know, when I can say without any fear of contradiction that the region can be astonishingly supportive when it's in the mood. When I was Minister of Finance many moons ago, and we found ourselves with such an enormous financing gap as regards trying to restore the economy of Guyana to balance. The people that lent us assistance initially and continue to lend us throughout were CARICOM countries. We chose, or the OECD countries chose a spokesman to be chair of the support group. It happened to be Canada. And they did an excellent job. But Caribbean heads, Prime Minister Chambers, sorry, I'm not you too young even to know who's those names. So that's a Prime Minister, former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, immediately after Eric Williams. You have, what's his name from St. Lucia, who died? John Compton. Even St. Vincent. I shouldn't say even, they don't sound bad. I mean, even in that it was small. It was small at that time, economy-wise. You cannot believe the number of times they're giving speeches. They're giving a speech in Washington. They're giving a speech in Europe. They would consult and ask, look, this is what I'm going to read. There's a section in here I've written on giving help to Guyana and giving help to, let us say, the Eastern Caribbean states which have problems with definition of GDP and so forth. And that worked tremendously. I think the Europeans and Americans were fed up with these talkative, noisy, persistent Caribbean countries, but they responded. And we have to be able to utilize, because we have, I mean, I see the educational standards in the region are the subject of very adverse comment by the World Bank and others. But I was going to say, we have capacity. We are good at talking. I'm sorry to say, we need to work on the education system, so it's more than talking. But the point is, we can do things, and we need to all do it, even when, because in Guyana's case, what happened occurred after a time that between Eugenia Charles, Compton, and things, they fell out with President Burnham, and yet with some cooks, and they came and assisted us in all sorts of fora. We could not have survived that without them. So it's worth working on your regional colleagues, even though sometimes they are a little frustrating. We are a little frustrating.
Thank you for your contribution. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this is the end of the formal segment of the symposium. I'd like to just make some highlights of the main points highlighted by each speaker. Dr. Kirton provided us with a historical overview of the border dispute and made some recommendations as it remains to the establishment of a special unit in Guyana to engage in strategic analysis. He also mentioned the importance of engaging in some enlargement of the regional security system and the importance of sensitizing the citizenry. Professor Correa highlighted Brazil's dynamic relationship with Venezuela. He highlighted the Brazil's perspective on the referendum and the annexing of the Essequibo region. He highlighted how this dispute hinders Brazil's attempt to achieve integrated Latin America. And he also highlighted its implications for increased irregular migration. Ambassador Insanally highlighted the asymmetrical relationship that exists between Venezuela and Guyana. He mentions Maduro's attempt to gain support in the midst of his falling popularity and highlighted the role of the UN Security Council in addressing these issues. And then finally, we had Mr. Greenidge discussing the distinctive features of this Venezuela's claim to Guyana's territory, which he characterized as a form of bullyism. He also highlighted the strategic significance of the Essequibo region and highlighted that many attempts have been made to address the issue of Venezuela's continue to want to pursue it on a bilateral basis. So I know that we could discuss this from now till, because they've been doing that since 1962. So we won't be able to achieve an end to that today, but I know that you can always engage them in further discussion. And I would like to thank you for your participation, for your attendance, for your attention, and for your critical engagement of the issue. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to our online panelists and viewers. And once again, continue to tune into our future symposiums and discussions of this nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.